I think they get inside our heads and make us do destructive things like drink and overeat. I've seen good people go bad and smart people go mad. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 3 of season 6. We are continuing our series about close encounters with aliens, this time with the film The Vast of Night.
All right. Well, as Mel said in our intro, we're going to be kind of picking up from the theme of aliens and picking up from our last episode where we talked about Fire in the Sky, an alien abduction story, and talk about the more recent movie, The Vast of Night, which if you haven't seen it yet, there will probably be spoilers. So you may want to, if you don't want anything spoiled, just go ahead and hit pause and go watch it. I know it's available on Amazon Prime. I think it's a Prime original, if I remember right. But just be warned, there will be spoilers. So this movie, it came out in 2019. It's directed by Andrew Patterson and written by Andrew Patterson, though he used the pen name James Montague, and also written by Craig W. Sanger. And this is pretty much their only film. This is the only IMDb credit for them. A little bit of trivia too. Patterson financed this film himself with just a small budget of $700,000, which in film industry stuff is actually pretty small these days. And filmed it in a couple of weeks, and it's starring Sierra McCormick as the phone operator named Faye, and Jake Horowitz, who's a radio DJ, Everett Sloan. And it's set in New Mexico in the 1950s. And it's supposedly, loosely based, at least, on real cases, the Kecksburg UFO incident, and there's one in Foss Lake as well. So this movie is, it's a lot of fun, if I say so myself. This was not my first time watching it. I first watched it a while back when probably not long after it first premiered. It was one of those things that was recommended to me based on my Amazon Prime watch history. And so, I saw it, saw the title, saw the cover art, looked at it, read the review of it, and said, yeah, that sounds really interesting. And it's a really interesting movie, kind of a slow burn, but set in the 1950s, and kind of focuses around the radio DJ and phone operator, but there's also some other characters there. And it's just this small town with lots of weird things going on. So the movie takes place over the course of pretty much a single evening, and it's in this small town, and it's got this great just vibe to it that I was immediately drawn to. Like, it really does feel almost like a modern day Twilight Zone episode or something like that, where, it's not action packed like Independence Day, but there's a lot of things happening in the background that are really eerie and weird, and all signs begin to point towards something extraterrestrial. So I'm going to kind of stop there and just say I love this movie and kind of get Lisa and Mel's just kind of hot take overall opinions on the movie before we dive into a deeper discussion of it. So Lisa, Mel, what were your thoughts on this?
I love this movie. I'm like you, Matt. I saw it when it first came out. I think it was when it first came out on Amazon. It was a pandemic movie for me. I can't pinpoint exactly when, because that's one big blur, but I would say it was pre-vaccine pandemic when I was watching a lot of things on the streamers. And this was a standout for me. So I was really glad to get to revisit it for the podcast. There are so many things that I enjoy about this that we can talk about in more detail. It's, as you alluded to, Matt, is a very tightly told story. it does take place over one evening. So you're almost, I mean, you are pretty much following it in real time. You follow these two characters. They're very likable characters. You want good things to happen for them. I don't know, I enjoyed spending time with the characters on the screen, which made it a lot of fun. And just the whole town felt familiar to me. I loved the idea that the town was, that it felt a bit abandoned because everybody was at the basketball game at the high school, which felt very real to me knowing small towns. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that the two main characters were these very smart, like fast talking, just friends who were curious about the sound that they heard. And then I liked the nostalgia, the kind of sci-fi nostalgia of it too. I liked that it was told in like a framework almost story. So the Vast of Night was supposed to be like an episode on an anthology sci-fi series that the movie made up called Paradox Theater. So every once in a while you would see this screen and you would see the characters on the screen and kind of be reminded that, oh yeah, I'm watching an episode of like you mentioned, the Twilight Zone, or almost anything Rod Serling would do. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was just, yeah, sci-fi nostalgia. It was very well done, very well acted, very well written, well directed. I enjoyed the look of the film. It's really hard to fault a film like this, and it kind of blows me away that this was a debut film from these filmmakers, and that it was done on such a low budget. In fact, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that would be considered a micro budget, 700,000, or maybe just the very bottom end of low budget. But I liked it. I'm really curious to hear Mel's thoughts, because I feel like this is, if we could make a film for Mel, this might be it.
Well, I actually remember when this was first released on Amazon, Lisa, asking you if you had watched it because I was interested, and you had, and you told me to watch it immediately because it was a movie made for me. And I was like, okay, and I did, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, it really hits all the things I like about kind of creepy or sci-fi movies. And I mean, a lot of the stuff that you guys have already mentioned. Yeah, I love the homage to Twilight Zone with the idea of the Paradox Theater. I like that kind of postmodern meta way of telling a story where you get sucked into the movie and you're really following these characters, but then every now and then you're pulled out because you realize you're kind of watching something in black and white on a TV screen, and then it goes back into following the characters. The build up of what's going on from when they first hear the strange noise on the radio to the callers that they get on the radio station, I just think is really well done. Some of the shout outs that are in the movie, the radio station itself is WOTW, which, I mean, I think I saw in our notes that is possibly an homage to the War of the Worlds, which we talked about in our first episode on Aliens. It's a fun movie, and it's a cool period piece, but it also has these kind of meta or postmodern touches of like reaching out to other things and referencing other things I thought was just really fascinating. And in one of the articles that we read that were in our notes, I can't remember which one it was now, right off the top of my head. We read one in Variety and one in Vanity Fair. The person writing the article said that there are like aspects of horror in the movie, even though most people wouldn't think of it as a horror movie. And I was thinking about, and I could totally see that, especially from the director's response. The director talks about how the movie is all about the unknown, about things happening that you have no explanation for, or things happening that are beyond our understanding or our ken. And I think Aliens being possible is one of those things. And the way the movie builds on that, from there's this noise, it may be conversation, they've been here before, to the end, which, I mean, I know we're going to talk about all these steps, but these little stair steps, it's just really creepy and really kind of gets in your head. And I think one last thing I'll say before I toss it to you guys just for general discussion is This time around, I was really struck after I finished watching it about the beauty and the kind of horror all at the same time, especially at the end of the movie when they see the ships for the first time, and like it's like there is something weird going on. The music and their faces and the way I felt is like this almost sublime, like just weird beauty of seeing something like this that just seems like it couldn't exist, and it does. But then at the same time, it's really dangerous and scary. And I think the movie does a really good job of walking that knife's edge between curiosity and wonder. And this is something maybe we shouldn't be messing with, or maybe curiosity goes too far because it's just something we can't comprehend. So yeah, I mean, I highly recommend watching it. It's just a fun movie, especially listeners if you're into this theme that we've been talking about with aliens and alien encounters.
Well, I guess we should just jump into the discussion of the movie then, and kind of get into the nitty gritty of it. So the main characters, as we mentioned in this film, are Faye and Everett. Everett is the local radio DJ, and Faye is working as a switchboard operator. And they share a really kind of unique friendship in that I think they're both very intelligent. They both have big dreams. There's a moment, and I think it was referenced in the Variety article. There's a really good review in Variety for our listeners if they want to go ahead and look that up later. But where it talks about it, that Everett speaks as though he's getting out of the small town of Cayuga and he's going on to bigger and better things. But we get this sense, both in the way Faye reacts to that statement, but also just knowing what it's like in the 1950s for a young girl, a young woman, that she's probably not getting out of the town. You know, she's probably going to get a job like her mother did, either as a teacher or a switchboard operator, or she's going to get married and have kids, and that's going to be her lot in life. But you see their big dreams. There's a great scene where they're just walking. A lot of this early in the movie is just the two of them walking through the town and talking about what the future is going to be, what the future is going to look like. They talk about, you know, what could be out there. There's a really fun conversation they have about like electric roads and tube travel and what sounds like to us cell phones. The idea that she says at one point in a really funny moment, I think she says, yeah, you know, if your friend is in Paris and you're in Tokyo, you know, at one point y'all can pull out a little, I think she calls it a clamshell thing, a little clamshell thing, and see each other's faces and talk to each other that way. And if you call your friend and your friend doesn't answer the phone, you know they're dead, because everybody's going to have their phones with them. And at that point, Everett is kind of dubious when he hears this. What is funny about this is all of the, and this just shows the research of this film, all of the articles that she talks about that are in these science and mechanic magazines are actually real articles that the filmmakers researched and looked up and put them in the film. So things that she would have been reading. But I don't know, they're just, this film wouldn't be what it is without Everett and Faye. You know, again, you get the sense that they're almost too smart for where they're growing up, that they're destined for bigger things, or that they're definitely at least dreaming of bigger things. And the film also kind of puts them as outsiders, because everybody else, literally everybody else in the town, is at the basketball game. And that is the big thing. That is a pivotal moment in the film, because we learn later why it's important to have everybody at the game. But I really like the way this film does deal with like the concept of the outsider, in particular because the other characters that we meet who become important to the narrative are an elderly woman who is shut in at her home, and then a caller into the radio station who reveals himself to be an African American man who had seen some things during his time at the military that he had to keep secret and that he wants to share. But when you really look at it, 1950s New Mexico, this is a story that's built around these outsiders. And I think that having those characters at the heart of it is really important because the film wouldn't work any other way, really. So I guess we'll start there, just kind of talking about the characters. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
Well, as someone who has spent their entire life in the U.S. South, born, raised, whatnot, and constantly been told that I don't sound like I'm from around here, I I definitely felt a bit of a kinship with both of them. It not to sound egotistical, but that sense of being too smart for your hometown, or at least not fitting in and looking for bigger things. Not that I'm necessarily living in a bigger place than I grew up in, but just that idea of having your eyes towards the horizon and not wanting to be stuck, living and dying 3 miles from the place you were born, kind of thing. So I felt a special sort of fondness for both of them because I always felt that way growing up. That like, not that I don't love the South, obviously, I still live down here, but I don't know. There was something about when I turned 18, like I needed to escape my hometown and I needed to get out. And I'm the only one of my brothers that did. Don't have any sisters, just brothers. And all of them still live in my hometown, not too far from where we grew up. And so it's like, I don't know. I just really liked that about them. And that really hit home for me with these characters. That and just the fact that they're so, like, their conversations were so fun to listen to. It's very, very sharply written, great delivery on the dialogue, very believable, and yeah, I would love to be friends with them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying about them, like not quite fitting in. I mean, it just in the first like 20 to 30 minutes of the movie with listening to them talk. I mean, we're not even really looking at their faces. They're constantly doing a kind of walk and talk, and you don't always catch every single thing that they're saying, but their friendship is just really believable. And I thought it was interesting too the way Everett just took everybody who came to him kind of as face value, if that makes sense. There was no, I mean, he was really interested in the fact that she's reading all these magazines about technology and the future and into science fiction, and he just assumed that she was going to be going to college elsewhere, just like he wants to get out of town. I don't think he fully understood what you were saying, Lisa, about her possible inability to get out. I mean, what she wants to do is work at a bigger switchboard, which is not going to be something that's possible for a long period of time and isn't going to be sustainable. So yeah, I mean, you just, in those first 20 minutes, you get a feel for how small and insular the town is and how they fit in there, but they also kind of don't at the same time. And we also see just how curious they are too, which I think makes them the perfect protagonist for this movie, because not only are they do they want to read a lot and learn stuff and get out of this town, but you have them like practicing, I guess, their journalistic skills. Like he wants to be able to report on the radio. She has this tape recorder and she says it's fun to ask people questions. And so he's trying to get her to talk on the recorder. And she kind of acts like nobody's ever really wanted to listen to her talk before. It's just, they're so endearing. And I felt like I was really with them and cared about them deeply within a very short amount of time. They're also plot-wise perfectly situated to experience this weird phenomenon because he's at a radio station on the edge of town and she's a switchboard operator. So of course she's going to get any emergency calls, and her switchboard is probably going to be affected by any sort of energy issues or electrical issues. And because they're such good friends and maybe more eventually, she's listening to the radio station and hears the sound. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely endearing characters. You know, I think anybody who has been kind of nerdy, especially in a place where that wasn't necessarily cool, like back when we were kids, like we totally can identify with these characters. And then, yeah, they're just perfectly plot wise set up to be the people that would end up encountering this situation and then be interested enough to try to investigate it.
Yeah, I think that's the key there with these two characters, is that they are interested enough to investigate, because when they first hear the sound, or Faye first hears the sound coming over the radio, I think most people would just assume that it was interference of some kind, or maybe there was a problem with their own radio. Faye is immediately perked up by this. It's a mystery that she can solve. And because she has been working with some sort of like mechanical things with her little recorder that she's been doing, it's something that you can tell she has this like thirst for learning about the world around her that is really refreshing. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed too. And that Everett, at first, you can't really tell, is he like just playing along with her and just kind of indulging her? But he is as intrigued by it as she is, enough so that he actually plays the sound back on the radio and puts out the call to ask people, what is this? And that's when we really get drawn into the meat of the story. So you get to know these characters, you get to know the town, and then you're drawn into this mystery of what is the sound that he picked up on the radio. And that is what's so much fun. A few things, because I'm worried we're going to forget about it, but I want to mention this trivia because it just it shows how much fun this movie is. The radio station that he works at, the letters are WOTW, which you see outside his building at several points in this. So that's an homage to H.G. Wells and War of the Worlds, which is really fun. Just, again, I don't know. It's playing into that nerdy sci-fi loving heart. I feel like Faye and Everett would enjoy something like that if they were on the outside watching this, and it's certainly something we do. The town itself, and this is something that I don't think I picked up on the first time I watched it, but the town is called Cayuga. It's supposed to be in New Mexico. There is no town by that name in New Mexico. Now, there is a town, I want to say up in New York or near there. Don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure, but it is that is an actual homage to Rod Serling, whose own production company was called Cayuga Productions. So this is in a lot of ways a love letter to these stories that came before it, which I just love. But let's talk about the sound itself. Everett puts it out on the radio, and that's when we start to get the calls. The first caller who really can give information is this African-American ex-military person. There were a few things I noted about it. Number one, he's very reluctant to give too many details because he feels like he might get in trouble for divulging government secrets. But also he points out that he is the first Black caller into that radio station. And he seems very aware of his space in that. And I do think this is really interesting because I think it hits at, I mean, we talked about like the outsiders in this film and that being important. But also in telling these stories, we believe it. Everett believes it. Faye believes it. But you can almost hear it in his voice as he's telling it, that he realizes he may not be believed as he's telling the story, which I thought was a really fascinating dynamic to explore.
Yeah, I mean, he even says in his story that was part of how the military, as far as he was concerned, was trying to cover things up, because not only did they go around and get, people from various parts of the country who weren't going to be able to talk to each other after they finished their duty on these classified areas, working with this classified material, where he heard the noise that was on the radio. But I mean, he says, like, part of the reason nobody knows about this is that no one has ever listened to us. And he talks about how You know, he says at one point that everybody who was on these details not only didn't know each other because they were from different places, but the majority of them were African American or Mexican American. So, I mean, he's even pointing out, and now he talks about how he's old and he's sick, and whatever he's going to say against the military isn't really going to stick. Like, he's not a threat to this larger kind of complex. And I thought that was really interesting because Everett, it doesn't matter to Everett. He just wants the story and wants to learn more, though he wants to corroborate it. And that's why they have to go break into the library to get the tapes of the man from their town who had been involved and had tapes of the noise. And that's when they play that on the radio and the power goes out and some other weird things happen. But yeah, I agree with you, Lisa, that there's really interesting connections being made between outsider characters and in this movie, and that these are the people who are telling these stories and communicating with each other and being listened to, sometimes maybe for the first time, while everybody else is, you know, I guess conforming, as we're talking about like the 1950s, and going to the basketball game. And I mean, only one time in the whole movie that I can remember do they actually talk about like what you think people in the 1950s would talk about, that we're going to be invaded or it's a spy. It's much more focused on the people telling their stories and finally being listened to than it is that sort of thing. And I thought that was interesting too, because it's a very quiet, creeping dread, whereas most movies might take a different route of, Matt was saying it's not going to be like Independence Day. It's basically just these characters putting these clues together and trying to solve this mystery by taking into consideration people whose evidence might not have been listened to before.
I like the way you describe it as a slow, creeping dread. You know, to like a big Independence Day type movie. And that's something that we've really been focusing on in this particular series on aliens, because we did want to look at movies that were depicting the alien invasions as something much more intimate, which this certainly does. But that doesn't mean that it holds back on the terror at all or on the horror of that, because it does. It takes a moment to get there, and as you're doing it, you're slowly building up the suspense, you're slowly building up the dread, so much so that I think when the moments of horror, or at least the moments that terrified me in the film, when they get there, it's more shocking almost than a film that would take it much in like a much bigger, flashier way. So I think a good example of that is after we listened to the man calling into the radio. I want to say his name is Billy. I didn't write it down. I should have written it down. But
yeah,
when
it's Billy.
Okay, good. I was like, I don't think I made that up. After Billy calls in and you're listening to his story, it is spooky listening to him talk about this encounter and what's going on. He talks about like the part that really stuck with me is when he was talking about how they were digging these like bunkers and you get the sense that there's something major going on that's being hidden from us, but that fits into like every alien government conspiracy story I ever heard growing up in like the 80s and the 90s. So it didn't feel that shocking to me hearing his story, but it did build on that suspense because you knew, oh, something good is coming. Like we're starting to hear the stories. Then we get the call from the old woman, and she basically says, she demands that Everett come to her house. She says, this is where I live. There's a key under the flower pot for, the boy who mows my lawn or delivers groceries. I don't remember which, but there's a key under the flower pot. I need you to come. And that's exactly what he does. He takes Faye to this old woman's house. And this to me is one of the first moments truly of horror that we get in this film. And it is effective. It's already night. The town is abandoned, effectively. They get to this old woman's house, let themselves in. They don't know what to expect. they find her. She's sitting waiting, and she starts telling her story. And we've already been conditioned listening to Billy's story. And so when she starts speaking, you think, okay, I'm going to get another alien abduction type story. Except this one is terrifying because she talks about an encounter she had had about this child that she had out of wedlock, and it caused just a big uproar in the town, and she wasn't accepted, and so she was trying to raise this child, and her child, we later learn, disappears, and everybody thinks, she had something to do with it, which she didn't. But there was a moment where she's talking about it, because she talks about how she heard the sound on the radio and recognized it immediately because it was a sound that her son had made as an infant. I want to say he was 10 months old when she was telling the story. But we're sitting here in this dark house watching this old woman very slowly tell her thoughts on like what is out there in the universe. She talks about how she thinks there are aliens, they've been here before, they keep coming back, they're controlling things. Basically, she says something at one point that it's kind of like mind control on an individual basis, where they can make us do things, but also on a global basis they can make us like go to war with each other for no reason. And so it's this, kind of invasion of the body snatchers almost type of situation. But it was, for me, it was when she was talking about holding her infant son, and suddenly the infant started making these noises that were not human, and she realized that it was the aliens speaking through her son, basically, is the way. I'm getting shivers even talking about it. And then the fact that she took him to a doctor, and the doctor basically told her, your son was making normal baby noises. Do not tell anybody else this. And I don't know. I don't know what I would do if an infant was speaking like a alien broadcasts to me. I need to get your thoughts on that scene, but it was so scary.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was kind of creeped out just by the sound they were hearing on the radio, because it was just so strange and weird. But yeah, I think that's one of the most terrifying scenes, when they go and they're talking to this woman in this dark house. And, she's saying that she's reading the alien language off a card because she wrote it down phonetically when they come in, and they're just like, okay. And she says, I'm not some witch, I promise. And I thought it was interesting because I think that shows, playing off her theme about outsider, how she's been viewed by people her whole life. And she's on the outskirts of everything. And she actually wants to be taken by the aliens, which also creeped me out. I mean, obviously it's so she can be with her son because she believes her son's still alive. But I mean, that was just kind of terrifying. And everything she describes with her kid, how when he's 10 months old, he starts speaking the alien language. When he's 4 years old, she hears the wind pick up for no apparent reason just around her house. He's looking at the window and speaking the alien language. And she talks about how when he speaks the language, he's in a trance. And, she then describes exactly what she thinks the aliens look for. And everything that she's describing is what's happening that night, except for the fact that they just heard like grinding noises, and she says the aliens actually like transmit this language. The thing that really got me with hers, and I mean, that is terrifying with the little child, but the fact that she recognized the alien language when the child started speaking at 10 months old, because she had experienced this before. So she begins her story in the late 1800s when the trains had just been finished in the area, and talk about an isolated area. And people had claimed, and it was in the history books apparently, that the indigenous people in the area had like massacred, like taken a bunch of people off a train car and killed them. And she said that's not what happened, that a woman who had jumped off the car before all the people disappeared came to the town And she didn't say much, but they didn't get the impression, like she did not say anything about what they thought happening, but they make that story because they don't want to deal with her. And that was the fact that she was all kind of beat up looking and raggedy clothes and speaking in this language that nobody said they understood. And she then like refused really to talk to anybody, and one night crawled out the window and stole a horse and went away. And she's like, oh, that was creepy. But then when her 10-month-old starts saying the same words in that language that that woman had been saying, who claimed that, something weird had happened to the train car, that's like, there's these moments in what she's saying where you I don't know, I kind of like felt my heart beat a little faster, like a little pit in my stomach, because I'm like following along with her, like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. And because she's like on the outskirts of the community, she lost her parents when she was young. She wasn't living with her family. She was living with different people who would take care of her. Then she has a child out of wedlock. She's in a position where nobody's really going to listen to her when she tries to explain this stuff to her, or even tells her not to try to explain this stuff. And then when she gets to the end and she wants to get on the ship and she wants them to take her because it seems like she almost thinks they're the aliens, then I start thinking, oh man, maybe she is confused. But another thing I like about this movie is that every time they get new information, it's kind of tested in a way. Like they find the corroborating tapes in the library to kind of show that other people had this recording, like Billy said. And then I don't want to get too far ahead, but the other terrifying thing in the movie is when they're in the car with their friends and they start playing the woman saying the alien language, and the people in the car start going into this weird trance. And so there's these moments in the movie where it like the every time you think there might be a real world explanation, I hate to say real world because I guess it's real world, but every time you think you have an explanation that's not aliens, then something like cosmic fear basically happens all of a sudden and pulls you back into wondering what's going on. So yeah, I really feel like the dread and the terror kind of builds once they meet with Mabel and hear her story, because in the corroboration of that story is when things get like almost too much for Everett and Faye to comprehend.
Yeah. I mean, it is cosmic horror at its best, I think, because just the picture that the old woman paints is a very bleak picture of aliens or extraterrestrials visiting us, because they seem malevolent. they they really do. And we've talked about that in past episodes, how uncaring some of these encounters feel, and how there's like a terror in that. Like, I mean, certainly when we talked about Fire in the Sky, I felt like it was like that. It wasn't a malevolent feeling with the aliens. It was just a lack of care. I think they were looking at humans as just test subjects, and so it was this completely neutral relationship, which doesn't sound like it should be bad, but it is, because there's no sense of empathy. There's no sense that they're looking at us as like feeling creatures or thinking creatures. And here it's almost pushed even further, where they do seem malevolent towards us. And that's, I mean, just the way she's describing how they manipulate things that are happening on Earth and we don't even realize it. That, like, for the most part, most people don't realize it. I think that is cosmic horror. Like, that's the closest definition to cosmic horror I can think of. is this idea that there is a great big, either uncaring and or malevolent force in the universe that is affecting our lives and moving us around like pawn pieces, and we don't even know it most of the time. And this taps into that so well. And I feel like after we leave her house, the film really ratchets up tripping over my words. The terror in this, like it really, Mel, you were mentioning like the kind of sweaty palm, heart pace is starting to quicken. That's where this happens in this film is we leave and then we're kind of off to the races. All of the getting to know the town, getting to know the characters, let's just, see this little slice of life in this 1950s New Mexico town is gone at this point. We are introduced to Faye's baby sister, which she goes to check on her because she had been left with a babysitter and effectively abandoned, and she needs to make sure her sister's okay. I understand why the baby is with them. The baby certainly adds to the terror. The baby also kind of makes Everett and Faye this kind of nuclear family, even though there really isn't romance budding, I don't think, at this point between them. But from that point on, the film just doesn't. The second scene that I thought was really terrifying was when they were in the car racing towards the field and they are playing the sound of this recording, which they realize is radio broadcast kind of between the aliens, like speaking to each other, that I guess Everett just accidentally recorded when that night he happened to do it. And the reason, I mean, we've kind of danced around it. The reason the aliens are there that night is because of the basketball game, because they know everybody in the town will be in one place. Therefore, they can find the outsiders. They can find the people who will be alone, and they won't cause a disruption by their presence. So again, it's that kind of sinister planning behind what's happening that is a little bit terrifying. But when they're in the car, the driver of the car, I don't know, hypnosis is the best way I can describe it, but he reacts to hearing the alien language by basically going catatonic. And they're in a car speeding down a highway. And of course, it's the 1950s, so Faye is just holding that baby. No car seat, no seatbelt. And as you're watching the headlights go past, it's terrifying because everybody in the car is screaming. This alien weird language thing is playing. It was a scary moment in the film where I feel like we had only heard stories up to this point with Billy and the old woman telling what happened. But this was the first time that you're really seeing what this antagonistic force is capable of. And that's where the danger, I think, for the first time feels very real and very present.
Yeah, I agree. That's the moment for me. Well, I guess Mabel's house is really kind of the turning point, but it's like everything up to that point has been going uphill on the roller coaster, and Mabel's house kind of is the part where you crest the hill. And I think for me, probably the most unsettling scene was also the car scene. Just seeing their reaction to hearing that alien language, that catatonia, or I don't know if that's the right word for it, but causing them to go into that hypnotic sort of trance state was not just, it wasn't just scary for me for the reasons of the fact that they might crash the car, but just what this language was capable of doing to somebody, I guess. And it really does, like, from here on out, like, the movie is so quickly paced. I mean, we're pretty much close to the end anyway in terms of our discussion, but yeah, like that scene really, I don't know, it really stood out to me both the first time I watched it and this most recent time. I don't know if I have much else to add that elaborating further, but I just wanted to say that, like, that's one of those scenes from this movie that comes to mind when I think about this movie.
Yeah, it definitely does like kind of strike a match. And I mean, the end of the movie comes really fast, and it's been a slow burn up until that point. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so this is real and this is kind of scary because we don't know what's going on here. And then when they get out of the car, they're in the forest and then they see all the burned trees and the burned ground. They realize something's going on out there. So yeah, I mean, it picks up tremendously. And I mean, it is one of the scariest parts of the movie next to, I mean, maybe the end. One thing I thought was interesting with that too is, we had read some about the Hills experience of being abducted, and that's a mini episode. I think that's our last mini episode. But one of the things that they talked about and that they remembered during their hypnosis was that there were 3 beeps coming from the trunk area, and then they don't remember time after that. But in hypnosis, they were like, "Oh, when the 3 beeps happened, we went into a trance." And I guess the aliens must have had control of the car. And then when they hear 3 beeps again coming from the trunk, they woke up and they're just like cruising along, and they lost their 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I thought in other abduction stories, people talk about going into a trance. I guess that way they don't remember what happened to them. So I thought it was just an interesting little touch. We talked about the shout outs to H.G. Wells and the Twilight Zone, and Mabel's story reminds me of the monsters come to Maple Street with the aliens manipulating everybody. So I just thought that was interesting. The trance reminded me of different abduction stories we had looked at. And I thought it's really cool how the movie is taking like real life stories and then revising them for the film itself.
It was really well researched in that aspect. It was really, really well researched. And I think that lent to this feeling very plausible, even though this, and the film reminds you at several points that you're supposed to be watching this paradox theater. The film occasionally will kind of pull back and you'll see the characters in the TV screen, so you're reminded that you're watching a fictional story, but at the same time it does feel like a plausible fictional story, which I think those kind of research details really help. Of course, at this point, the car is racing. Mel, you said the end comes at at you really fast, which it does. They end up, Faye and Everett and the baby, our little kind of de facto nuclear family, end up in a field where they actually do see a saucer. An actual flying saucer, circle shaped, hovering above the field. And it's a beautiful moment. It's a terrifying moment because everything that's led up to this point, we're supposed to believe that these are dangerous, malevolent creatures who don't have the best of intentions towards humanity from what we've heard. But there is a moment where Faye and Everett, and by extension us, the audience, feels a sense of awe seeing them, which I think we keep going back to cosmic horror. I think good cosmic horror will do that. It will scare you, it will horrify you, but it's also supposed to evoke feelings of awe in the very basic sense of that word. But the end is ambiguous, so I think it's fitting that maybe we end this episode talking about what our takes on the ending are. In the end, we really just see an empty field. We see Faye's tape recorder and I think glasses, if I'm right. And now I'm second guessing that, but we see what they were holding, and the 3 people are gone. Faye, Everett, and Maddie, the little girl, is now gone. Guys, I really want to know what happened there. What's your take on the end of that film?
100% they were abducted. I mean, that's my take. I mean,
I'm with you.
I mean, it is ambiguous in that we're not specifically told that, but I mean, all signs are pointing towards that, especially with that hinting at using the basketball game's attendance to pick up outsiders, and these 2 people plus the baby sister have established themselves as outsiders. I mean, it just totally fits. Plus, I mean, there's the tape recorder left in the woods and the footprints. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
we know the rules of this movie. That's one thing I like about horror movies and science fiction movies is they establish a set of rules early on. And this movie did. It established, like you said, Matt, all of the rules of what happens. You know, the aliens come when there's a big event in town so that, you know, there's only going to be a few people left not participating, and they can come and they can take them. So they knew going to investigate this. The characters knew that was a possibility because the rules had been so clearly defined. And then it is, I guess we're not supposed to be surprised that it happens. Mel, what's your thoughts?
I completely agree with you that we've been given the rules, except we don't ever know that the aliens actually took people. We just know that the woman found the footsteps at the end with no kid there. So the first time I watched the movie, I thought, oh, they've been abducted. Good luck to them. And the second time I watched this movie for this podcast, at first I thought, well, they've been abducted. But then I kind of was looking at the tape recorder, and the tape recorder is covered in ash, which it wasn't when they set it down, because there was no alien ship there when they walked up. It was just a grassy hill, and so it's just completely ash. And I wondered if it was a darker end. If they'd just been abducted, I kind of figured that wouldn't be the case, that it would just be the tape recorder sitting there behind. So I don't know. I'm pretty sure they were probably abducted, but upon second viewing, I started to wonder if maybe they weren't even alive anymore. So yeah, there's that. And I feel like if I watch the movie again, I'll probably pick up on something else during it that might make me think something else, because there really are no certain answers, as all fear of the unknown cosmic horror tales do. All right. Well, we've reached the end of the movie. We've talked about what we think. Listeners, it's your turn now. If you haven't watched the movie yet, to watch it, or let us know via social media what you think happened at the end of this ambiguous movie. We hope if you hadn't watched The Vast of Night before you listen to this episode, that you've watched it since, either before you listen to this episode to have it be spoiler free, or now if you're going to go watch it. And we hope you enjoy it. So we are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. So if you do have thoughts about The Vast of Night or any of the other movies or stories we've been talking about, you can always shout out to us and let us know what you're thinking about the theme we're doing so far. If you love what we're doing, you can consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. Every other week, we do a mini episode related to the larger theme that our patrons can listen to. Or if you can't do that at this particular time, we completely understand. You can always tell a friend or family member who you think would be interested in the show. And you can also simply rate and review us on whatever podcast app you are listening to the show on. And those options are entirely free, and they help other listeners find us. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thank you for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.